Some people have secrets, and some people have secrets. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss a history of violence. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and today I've got double co-hosts. Please welcome Justin and Brittany Baker. How are you guys?
Good.
Thanks for having me again, and thanks for having my tag-along here today.
Yes, very excited.
I was about to say, this was all planned around her. So she is a mystery crime buff, as I gathered, and so we tried to find one of those that connected with the comics, and hopefully we succeeded.
Had no idea there was a graphic novel attached to this movie.
Very few people do. Which was actually my first question. Like, were you familiar that this was a graphic novel?
Absolutely not.
I never heard of it before.
I don't think you had heard of the movie before.
No.
Well, we got some interesting little tidbits about both. So let's get into the graphic novel. So the graphic novel was written by John Wagner. John Wagner, although not really known for a history of violence, he actually was the same guy who created the character Judge Dredd. Y'all familiar with Judge Dredd?
Oh, yes. One of my favorites.
Which one? The Carl Urban or the Sylvester Stallone?
Sylvester Stallone is good in a campy sense to me. I feel like the gun is better in that one. But as an overall movie, I have to go with the Carl Urban.
I kind of agree with that. I also like that Carl Urban keeps the helmet on.
Yes.
That was a big deal about the character. But this isn't Judge Dredd. We're talking history of violence. History of violence, again, graphic novel. The art was done by Vince Locke. The comic, you said you're not familiar, so I will tell you, the comic book is entirely in black and white. And he switches between kind of very rough and gritty illustrations when the action is supposed to be a little bit more intense. And then when it's settled down a little bit, it's very clean, very detailed. His pencil work and all is just, it's really great. But the black and white I like because the graphic novel is told in kind of a noir style. Whereas the movie is just straight up, almost a...
It's very pale.
It's in the Midwest.
Yes, the Midwest, just like you.
Yeah, and also, so it does kind of, to me, the movie kind of has more of a urban cowboy type feel to it in the way he kind of responds.
Mm-hmm.
But the comic was released by Paradox Press, which is actually part of DC Comics. But here's the thing. Not surprised you never heard of it. Sales of this comic book were actually so poor that they stopped printing them. And it wasn't until the release of the movie that they re-released the comic book, this time being released by Vertigo Comics, which is also part of DC. And so not surprised you never heard of the comic. I had never read the comic until recently, and it's going to be very interesting to talk about the connections there.
Yeah, I feel like one of the main reasons even anybody knew about the movie was the main cast.
Well, the one main character.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the main character.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you had... We'll of course get into characters a little bit more, but yeah, you got Liam. You got Viggo Mortensen. I don't know why I was wanting to call him Liam. You got Viggo Mortensen pretty much riding his coattail from Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And this being a David Cronenberg movie, he had just done Eastern Promises with David Cronenberg, which, to be honest, I think a lot of people confuse these two movies.
Okay, I've never actually heard of that one.
Yeah. So the movie was released September 30th, so we are almost right here at the anniversary. September 30th in 2005. Now, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but when did you first see this movie?
I feel like I saw this in college. This would have been my freshman year at Georgia Southern. So I feel that was a long time ago, but I'm 90% sure, maybe now 75% sure, saw it in Statesboro.
I saw it 3 days ago.
I actually saw this when I was working at Blockbuster when it came out. And here's a funny little tidbit. This was the last movie to be released on VHS.
Oh, wow.
So there's your little trivia. What was the last movie released on VHS? A History of Violence.
Wonder if it's in the last Blockbuster as the last VHS.
Oh, if they're still carrying VHSs. So just like the comic, the movie wasn't a huge hit. It did have moderate success. I was honestly kind of surprised. I don't know about y'all. This movie's only like an hour and a half long.
That's what you were saying. You felt like it was too short.
Yeah, I felt it needed to be a lot longer.
Yeah, there obviously, and we'll get into this when we're talking about the comparison, but just to hold it up to the screen for y'all to see, like, that's the thickness of the graphic novel.
Oh,
wow.
So yeah, there you go. Well, what's funny, again, all this connection of people not knowing these things. So David Cronenberg, who was the director, wasn't even aware it was a graphic novel until they had started filming.
Oh, gosh.
That's going to explain a little bit later. But let's get into the characters. We've already talked about Viggo Mortensen, who plays Tom Stahl / Joey Cusack. Those are not his names in the comic. In the comic, it is Tom McKenna, and it's Joey Mooney or Muni. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it. I'll probably say this again, but they decided to change the names from being Italian names to being Irish names. So they're Irish names in the movie. They're Italian names in the comic. So other than that, I don't really know what was the other any significance to it. I guess they just didn't want to fit the stereotype of Italian mobsters and gangsters.
Probably a little overdone.
What'd you think of Viggo Mortensen's performance?
I actually thought it was not very good. I don't know if it was just his character, the way it was written. He seemed very short and silent, a man of few words.
Not very likable.
Yeah.
Not a family man.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I'm not a fan of Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
I did not like him in Lord of the Rings. I don't know if I've ever seen anything I've liked him in.
I can't even think of anything he's done after this.
Wasn't he in like a horse movie?
Seabiscuit?
Hidalgo.
Yeah.
No, Hidalgo.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing too, is that he's supposed to be this, small town, everybody loves Tom, kind of guy. And I just go, he doesn't come across as likable at all.
Well, the first time you see his restaurant, there's only one guy in there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like he was doing great business.
Well, but then he kills a couple of guys, and he's got a packed cafe.
Well, that's the restaurant I want to go to. Hey, honey, you want to go to the restaurant where the guy killed somebody?
The murder cafe?
That sounds like something I would want to go to.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, people go to Murder Kroger, or used to.
It's gone.
Yeah. R.I.P.
Oh, they don't have Murder Kroger anymore?
No, now it's like super fancy Kroger.
Yeah. I
okay.
think it's got a bar inside.
Listeners who don't know what we're talking about, just Google Murder Kroger, Georgia, and that's all you'll need to find. So let's get on to who is, in my opinion, this is the villain of the movie, because he's the first hour of the movie, and that's Carl Fogarty, which, again, completely different name. In the comic books, the name's John Torino, but played brilliantly by Ed Harris. I love Ed Harris.
Anything Ed Harris touches is gold.
Yeah, I mean, he can make anything work. His character in the Truman Show is just great.
Oh, yeah. I could watch Ed Harris stare at paint drying. It'd be a masterpiece.
Yeah. I think the best scene with him in this movie is the mall scene.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, with the wife and the daughter.
Yeah. And just the little speech he gives of, he's cold-blooded.
Mm-hmm.
That scene.
Let's see. Real quick, we'll hit the kids. So there's Jack and Sarah. In the comics, it's Buzz and Ellie. So differences there. Jack's character is also very different because in the comic book, Jack is actually very popular.
Oh.
And has a girlfriend. Although, was that girl his girlfriend in this movie? That was kind of...
It's kind of like undetermined.
It's not really a girl friend. Not like they're dating. It's just a friend that's a girl. I believe they're, smoking weed on the sidewalk?
Yeah, just out in public. I did find that kind of... Here's a couple of teenagers just sitting on a stoop out in public.
Yeah.
Is Barney Fife the cop?
Yeah, middle of an intersection in just downtown, smoking a joint. We have the wife, Edie, played by Maria Bello. That is the same name, obviously different last name. I liked her in the movie because she's a lot more, she's a lot more of a character than she was in the comic book. They give her more, she's more important. In the comic, all she is she just works at the diner with Tom. But in this one, she's a lawyer.
Yeah, I like that they gave her a job as a lawyer. I wish that they had kind of evolved that character a little bit more. Like, they kind of bring up that she's a lawyer, but you never really see her doing anything with her profession in the movie.
Yeah, you would think, with it being a crime thriller, that having a character as a lawyer, there'd be something that they would need her to be able to do.
Yeah.
And I felt like she was one of the better actors, other than probably Ed Harris, that she was one of the better actors in the movie as well.
You say that, however, John Hurt, who plays Richie, was actually nominated for an Oscar.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
John Hurt got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this role, in which he's only in the movie for 10 minutes?
Not even 10 minutes, yeah.
But yeah, nominated for an Oscar.
I feel like that happens a lot. I was literally reading an article today, and it was like all these people who had won like Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, and it would show the screen time, and it would be like 12 minutes, 15 minutes. Like, Anne Hathaway won it for Les Mis, and she was in it for 15 minutes, and 5 of it she was singing a song.
Yeah, Judi Dench won it for Shakespeare in Love, and she's only in the movie for like 8 minutes.
I guess him having that kind of Irish mobster accent, he just kind of stole the show, because kind of once he's in the movie, it takes a different tone.
That it does. That it definitely does. But did you believe that this was like small town people?
I mean, it felt so weird. I don't know if it was just their like location casting or what, but his diner is absolutely packed after he kills the robbers. And then later, when he goes running to the house thinking that, Ed Harris's character, Fogarty's going there, there's not a soul.
Nobody.
In the town.
There's nobody. He doesn't pass anybody running. He runs like 2 or 3 blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And never passes anybody. There's never another car in sight.
And then in the mall scene, it's packed in the mall. So it's just everybody, nobody go downtown. It's just like downtown Statesboro where everybody's on the other end of town and not in downtown.
Well, my thing is, it was supposed to be set in Indiana, but I wouldn't be able to guess that because there was no dialogue, like there was no accent, no drawl. Some people sounded like they were from the South.
Mm-hmm.
Some people sounded, even though it was Indiana, some of them sounded more like they were a little bit more Midwestern, like more of the Minnesota type.
Hey.
So I didn't get a lot of the performances. Even though, like I said, even though John Hurt, no, it is William Hurt, isn't it? Even though he got the Oscar nomination, to me, his part was just extremely stereotyped.
Mm-hmm. I mean, his accent in that movie, it almost made me chuckle at first. Hearing his voice. Kind of reminded me of The Godfather, him talking with the cotton balls in his mouth.
Yeah, there was something just a little, and again, that was supposed to be Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I was like, that doesn't sound like a Philadelphia accent.
Mm-mm.
Well, and then when you go back to the cop, he's wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and I'm from the Midwest, and that's not a Midwestern thing. Now we're are we all of a sudden in Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The transplant from Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the other guy the cook that works at the cafe, when he's doing in the beginning when he's doing the news report. He's just like, well, I got to tell you, they thought they were gonna kill me, and it's like, where are you from? You're not from Indiana either.
I'm wondering if the director just said, sound like a bunch of dumb hicks.
Hello, movie viewers and fellow movie lovers. My name is Tim Williams, and I'm the creator and host of Movie Views Presents the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. See, I love the 80s, and I have a great appreciation and nostalgic passion for the classic 80s flicks that birthed my love for movies and ultimately helped shape my childhood. On each episode, I'll discuss, with a special guest co-host of course, a different film from the 1980s. We'll share memories, favorite characters, iconic scenes, and even share some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. We'll discuss famous blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Coming to America, Ghostbusters, Dirty Dancing, Top Gun, Die Hard, and many, many more. As well as some other cult classics and even lesser-known flicks we discovered on cable TV or the now-defunct video rental stores. Remember those? No matter what 80s flick we choose to talk about, we'll always have a good time, so come and check us out. You can find the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast on major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss a single episode. Once again, I'm Tim Williams, and I hope you'll join me for the next 80s Flick Flashback.
All right, let's get into the moving panels. Let's just go ahead and break down the comic and how it connects. So the novel itself is broken into 3 parts. They're called chapters, but I mean it's pretty much a whole story in each one of these. So I more call them parts. But in chapter 1, that is pretty much the first hour of this movie. The diner part, the mobsters, the confrontation at the house in the front yard. I mean that is exactly what happens in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is completely ignored for the movie. Chapter 2 is where it's a flashback. And we actually get to see who Johnny was, why these guys are after Johnny, who Richie is, which in the comics is just his friend, not his brother.
But that would have been very useful.
Yeah, very helpful.
That's what we kind of agreed on, was that the movie needed more backstory, more character development.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I do like some of the changes, though, they made. So in the comic, Joey and Richie, what the background is that Joey and Richie decide that they are going to steal from the mob. And so they make a plan, they execute it, they end up killing several of the mobsters in the process. Richie is then found out later. He's caught by the mob and tortured, and Joey believes he is killed. Joey is then tracked down because Richie gives up Joey. So Joey is then tracked down, and it's actually Torino, which is Fogarty in the movie. It's when he's chasing him that Joey does, they talk about this in the movie, does the thing with the barbed wire catching the reason why he doesn't have the eye. Yeah, but then there's also a whole thing, which I get when they don't do this in movies. Torino actually chops off one of Joey's fingers in the process. And so there's this whole thing about how Tom is missing a finger, and that's one of the other ways that Torino, which like I said, it's Fogarty in the movie, how he knows that is in fact Joey. Which, weird enough, he actually carries in a vial that he wears around his neck.
Oh gosh.
And then chapter 3 is where the movie kind of adapts more. In the comic, Tommy, Joey, whatever name you want to say, he returns to New York. It's New York, not Philadelphia, because he wants to put an end to all of this. And so he goes after the remaining mobsters. He actually discovers that Richie, which again is his friend, Richie is still alive, but they have been slowly torturing him for the last 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, when we finally see Richie in the comic, he is nothing more than like a disfigured torso.
Oof.
And so Joey kills everybody. He then kills Richie in a mercy killing, put him out of his misery. And then the comic book ends with Joey in the hospital with Edie. Edie actually came to New York with him in the comic, and they kind of discuss a little bit, which we'll get into that in a second. So obviously we've already talked about some of the changes. So the names are changed from Italian names from the comic to Irish names in the movie. Again, don't know if this was around the same time. I'm guessing that because I wasn't a big fan of this, but maybe The Sopranos were still big on television in 2005.
I believe so.
So maybe it was to avoid any comparisons with The Sopranos. The settings changed. The movie, it's Indiana. He then goes to Philadelphia, where he's supposed to be originally from. In the comic book, it's Michigan, and then he goes back to New York. I don't get why. Why do you change Indiana and Michigan?
There's not a big difference.
You would know. You were born and raised in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Ohio to Indiana or Ohio to Illinois. I mean, unless you're saying a big city, unless you're saying Chicago or Cleveland or Detroit, if you're just saying a state in the Midwest, there's not a huge difference. So maybe unless there was somebody on the crew that had some tie to Indiana and they wanted to call it back to them.
I didn't actually look this up, but I would almost bet you they filmed the whole thing in Canada. One thing that I actually will say I did like, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is the focus of the stories. So the focus of the comic is this is just a mob story. It's just a crime story. There's no depth to it whatsoever. It's, hey, this guy has surprised everybody by killing a couple of serial killers, and now the mob is after him, and then he goes after the mob, and the end. Whereas I think the movie focuses more on really what the title is, a history of violence.
Yep.
And that how do people deal with someone who has this history of violence?
I just wish they could have gone a little deeper into that.
Yeah, you had everything happen. You had the family finally figure out who he is, and then the story kind of wraps up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost would have been instead of a short movie, make it a 2-hour movie or even a limited series would have been really
That's what we always say about comic book stuff. Make it a series. Like stop making the 2-hour movies. Just make it a television show, or make it a 4-hour movie like Justice League or Endgame.
Yeah, I want the who's the director of this?
David Cronenberg.
I want the Cronenberg cut.
Ooh, I don't know about that. Did you think that this was a violent movie?
No.
Not really.
I think in today's terms, no, which probably sounds terrible.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, back in 2005, maybe.
So let me take that question another way. What about the graphic nature of some of the killings?
Coming from listening to and watching a lot of crime and mystery things, I would say no.
Yeah. I would say there was more the graphic nature of other things going on in the movie other than the violence was a little more disturbing to me, especially between Tom and Edie.
Because I gotta say, the cafe scene at the beginning, he shoots the one guy, shoots the younger guy, just blows him out the window. That's fine. But then he shoots the other guy, and then when they cut back to him, it's like his jaw.
Oh yeah, that was probably the best, thing of like actual graphic violence that I saw.
What?
After that, it was mostly probably blood spatter.
But in the front yard,
there's that other guy.
Yeah, shoots the guy's nose off.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it wasn't bloody, I cringed when he steps on the guy's neck.
In the house.
Because,
Yeah, I thought the way the movie started, there was going to be a lot more violence. They're at the motel, and he's going in to get the water, and you have the 2 dead bodies, and then he shoots the little girl. Like, starting out with that, I was I thought there was going to be so much more. I mean, that's such an intense way to start.
And I thought the cafe scene did a very good job of showing, this nobody Midwesterner, cafe owner, Viggo Mortensen did a good job of kind of showing like he knew what he was doing. Like it wasn't like fight or flight. Like it looked like he was actually trained or he had experience fighting.
Yeah, and that's another difference. So in the comic book, was really just a kid. I don't know if they actually say his age, but maybe late high school age or early right out of high school. Him and Richie both. And because their disguise to go into the restaurant to surprise the mobsters is they dress as Boy Scouts.
Oh gosh.
Oh wow.
And so in the comic, no, he is not trained. This is a one incident thing. He and Richie decide to, rob the mob, and they kill a bunch of mobsters, and then they flee. And that's the only thing, other than them later being chased by Torino. But he gets away, and he spends 20 years with this new identity. And no, he's not trained, which does make it a little weird that he is able to take out those two guys as efficiently as he does when you're talking about he only did one crime as a kid, and now it's 20 years later, and he can take out two killers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then later also take out other mobsters and all.
But that explanation of his backstory almost explains his interaction with his son so much more. Like when his son beats up the bullies and then he basically beats up his son, it kind of explains it so much more that it was like this one incident that happened in his life, and he's like, you don't want to be defined by violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really wish they had got deeper into that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the movie does kind of the whole how does violence affect people a lot more than the book does. Mm-hmm. Whereas the book does give what you were talking about earlier, it does give Joey's background a little bit more in detail. We know that he's a good kid who just made this one bad decision. The whole reason he did it was because his grandmother was ill and he wanted to be able to take care of her. And then, of course, he lives this great life. Once he decides to become Tom McKenna, he supports his family no matter what. His family supports him no matter what. That's another thing about the comic, is that when his wife does find out the truth, she just goes, okay, we'll deal with this. She just accepts it. So I do think that the movie does go a little bit deeper into it. I mean, we do get Maria Bello, her portrayal of Edie. We get her reacting to everything. We get her, really, she plays a stronger woman. A woman who, like, when she comes in, she goes, I want to know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have to tell me the truth. And then when he reveals it, she goes and throws up. And so I think it told a really good story, considering that, like I said, the focus of this movie was about how does violence affect people.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and the same thing with, like you were saying, with the bully. The fact that Jack starts off as this helpless, using more of his intelligence to get out of the fight. And then all of a sudden, after the stuff goes down with his dad, he just snaps. And I mean, there was no doubt at all that the other kid didn't stand a chance.
Yeah.
I was very surprised at how easily he beat up, two or three kids?
Just two, yeah.
Yeah, because, well, he takes out that first guy pretty effectively. But then, just decks the bully. And I think it also was just catching them off guard.
Yeah.
So anything else about the movie that stuck out to you? Or
for me, like I said, I would have loved a deeper dive kind of into the family dynamic, especially how the little girl, the daughter, I can't think of her name, like how she would have seen this. Because especially the incident outside where Fogarty has the son, she doesn't see any of that. Edie's covering her from that. I thought that would have been a very interesting dynamic to see how this little girl would, realize that, daddy's killed people.
I think that's your sequel right there.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm always the one who is waiting for that twist at the very end, waiting for them to have the possibility to turn it into a sequel, and it didn't have that little twist at the end that I was hoping for. It kind of wrapped it up relatively nicely.
You don't see Edie hand him anything. So the kids do at the dinner table.
Yeah.
So it doesn't.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that final scene? Like, I mean, the last 6 minutes of the movie has absolutely no dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And I think he comes in. They have the dinner table set except for his. But it was set off to the side, and then the daughter puts, his plate and silverware, and then the son hands him the meatloaf.
It's kind of like they're accepting this other side of him.
Yeah, they're fine. They're fine with him. It's just you don't know if the wife has really accepted him or not. That's what it felt like to me.
What about the moments before that? Because it starts before that with him walking to the lake and throwing the gun into the lake. I mean, it's just like, what do you think Cronenberg was trying to get across with just this? After he kills his brother, it just goes no dialogue for the remainder of the movie.
I mean, to me, it felt like he was washing away, especially when he goes to the pond, he starts washing the blood off, that he's washing Joey off from him, that he doesn't want to be Joey. He wants to be Tom.
Well, that was another thing, going into the violence aspect, and really Joey, Tom's past, being a trained assassin, which this movie does heavily imply. With him, I like that he uses the words in the movie, I went out to the desert and killed Joey.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Like, I thought he was dead. But it's the fact that he said, I killed Joey.
Well, that brings up a thing we were discussing during the movie while we were watching it, is I think you thought for a second that he might be bipolar or schizophrenic, to where, does he have a split personality disorder?
Yeah, can he go between the two?
Yeah, like, has he been going in between Tom and Joey, all willy-nilly, instead of it just being, he used to be a mobster and he went straight.
Yeah. Edie actually mentions that once it's kind of revealed, because she says, do you have is this like a split personality thing? I think that would have been too campy, though.
Mm-hmm.
They had done like this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of aspect with them.
I do like that they completely come out in the movie and he owns up to being Joey, because he says when they're out in the yard, he's like, I should have killed you in Philly. It's at that point that you're like, okay, he was this other person. There's no question now. I kind of liked that there wasn't that question.
There's closure.
That's what I was going to ask you when you talked about the twist. I think the comic does a pretty good job. Of course, they have more pages to flesh it out. Through that whole first act, you're really unsure. Is he actually this Joey guy or not? Whereas I don't know if it was because I had, read the comic and then was watching the movie again or what it was, but did you ever doubt, could this be a mistaken identity? Or did you just right off the bat think, yeah, he definitely is Joey. He's definitely this guy they're after?
I think I definitely questioned it throughout. I think when he finally says that one statement, I felt like it was, but I even made a note, is he saying that? Or is he just trying to buy more time? Is he trying to own up to saying, yes, I am Joey? Or was that just to buy more time? So there was, even after that moment came, I wasn't 100% sure.
Well, because I was wondering, you were talked about kind of that twist or whatnot. To me, was that it? Him revealing that he really is Joey. And then at the same time also having Jack be the one that actually kills Fogarty.
I think I always just like the little twist at the end. At the end you're kind of seeing, does he want to just go back to this life being Tom? But it's what if you saw this one last thing at the very end where he really is Joey all along?
Kind of gives you that something to talk about at the end of the movie. Whereas I think with the twist kind of in the middle of the movie, in the front yard,
it allows you to close it.
Yeah.
At one point I thought, I was like, is this going to be the backstory for a villain? Because I didn't know the comic book, so I didn't know if this was a series where this was almost the origin story, and then it led into more stories. Like, he really becomes Joey at the end of the movie, and then it leads into him being this villain now. Like, that was a question I was thinking at the end.
Well, what would make you think that he would be the villain? Like, couldn't he be the hero? Could he be, like, you're thinking like Jack Reacher type character where he goes from story to story. But why would you think he would be the villain of the story?
I don't know. I think I'm thinking we just watched Cruella, like the origin story, quote unquote. And, you always think of her as this bad character, bad villain and everything. And then you watch the origin story and you feel bad for her. And so, I don't know. I guess that's where my mind went. Like, is it this, like, misguided where, like, does he have this kind of backstory, but then in reality he becomes this villain later on, but has a different backstory. But now that I know it's a one and done.
I would have liked to have seen a story where, like you said, he went to the desert for 3 years and killed Jody. That would have been a good movie for me to see the transition of him going from that history of violence to, being a simple Midwesterner, kind of becoming a normal person, getting married, having kids.
So I kind of agree with you on that, and I'll probably reiterate this in my final decision. I do think this probably could have been a really good trilogy. Like, if the first movie had been just chapter 1 and had ended with the front yard showdown, I think that would have been great. And then the second movie could have been more fleshing out the background. Almost kind of like The Godfather. The second Godfather movie goes back and tells his story from growing up in Italy. So you could almost have that aspect. And then have the third movie be now he's going to finish things off. And, confront, again, Richie in the movies. But, go back to the mobsters that, are ruining his life and end it once and for all. So I do think this could have been a really good trilogy. And the fact that they squeezed it into an hour and 35 minutes.
Yeah, it was too short.
Yeah, it was kind of a disservice to the story.
Well, I think now in the age of streaming and so many original content things coming out, I think it could become a limited series, a mini series. I think that could be a strong possibility.
Again, as we talked about at the beginning, you being the crime podcast aficionado, like how did this crime story stack up?
It was not as crime heavy as I thought. It really was more the history of violence and can you still love somebody? Can you still appreciate somebody when you know their history and you know their past? So it was definitely a lot different than the podcast that I typically listen to for crime.
Yeah. If you got a graphic novel about missing people, that's right.
Well, I'm sure we can find some. Here's something that I found interesting talking about podcasts. Let's go back to the original podcast, old radio shows. So back in the 50s, there was a radio show called Suspense. And on March 8th, 1955, the name of the episode, the story that they were telling on that episode of Suspense was called Nobody Ever Quits. And again, it's 1955. The story is about a man named Joey who is hiding in small town USA from the mob. Joey, who let me also mention the actor who was voicing Joey for this radio show, was an actor by the name of Tom McKean. You remember what I said the character's name was in the comics? It was Tom McKenna. So Joey is hiding from the mob in small town USA. He is operating a small cafe in the town when the mob finds out where he is and comes after him.
When did the graphic novel come out?
The graphic novel was released in the late 90s, 97.
So they definitely took some references from this radio show.
Because who's going to remember all these radio shows?
Most definitely. I don't know if it's been confirmed, but I saw way too much online that was, it's like they definitely, John Wagner, who wrote it, definitely had to have been familiar with this radio show. I found that interesting.
It's a cool comparison.
All right, so let's get into our final decisions. I know Justin's familiar with this. You may not be, since you apparently don't listen to my podcast.
I'm so sorry.
I have tried. I apologize.
Yeah. We call it Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It, because that is the way you treat your comics. You either bag them because you really like them and you want to, keep them nice and pristine. So that means you would be saying this movie is one that you really enjoyed. Or you stack it, which means you just put it in a pile of other comic books. You might come back to it from time to time. So that would be like saying this movie is one that, you'll watch it if you're ever bored, or if you ever happen to be flipping through the channels and you got nothing else to watch. And then trade it, meaning you absolutely hated it. You would just rather give it to somebody else and try to get something better. So bag it, stack it, or trade it. Brittany, I will let you go first. What do you say and why?
Well, I feel like with Trade It, like, what if I appreciate it enough that I want other people to appreciate it?
That would be a stack it, because you're just putting it out there, and if someone goes, hey, I'd like to read that, you'd go, oh, sure. So if someone were to come over and go, hey, I've never seen History of Violence, would you go, well, let's watch it then?
I would definitely recommend it. Like, if somebody is into graphic novels and kind of likes that crime realm of movies, I think it's a great recommendation. I think it's definitely an underrated movie. I had never heard of it prior to doing this, and I really appreciated it. So I would say stack it.
Okay. Justin, how about you?
It's a definite stack it for me. It's a movie with so much potential. Like I said, I wish it was 30 minutes to an hour longer, or a limited series, or like you said, a trilogy. It's definitely one of those movies, if somebody has never seen it before, I want them to watch it. Watching Brittany, watching her watch the movie was fun, because she was sitting there, taking her notes, and then actually asked me, like, is he really Joey? Or is he Tom? Does he have split personality? And it's such a fun movie to watch with somebody who's never watched it before, or somebody who just hasn't watched it. Even me, I haven't watched it in probably 20 years.
Well, it could have been 20 years. It hasn't been out that long.
I'm not the math teacher. For me, there were parts that I had completely forgot about. Like, it took me by...
The last 30 minutes of the movie, I had completely forgotten about.
Yeah. The part where the son shot Fogarty in the back with the shotgun just, blew me away. I completely forgot about it. I almost gasped out loud. So it's a definite stack it for me.
I didn't even mention this, talking about the differences. In the comic book, it's actually Edie that shoots him.
Oh,
It's not the son. It's actually Edie.
I don't know how I feel about it. I kind of like the son, with his fight at the school.
Yeah, I do, because of his storyline.
Yeah, it definitely ties in more to his storyline. I think it's, a better story for him to be the one to shoot Fogarty.
I think the best moment, because that's him standing up for his dad. I think the best moment of Edie standing up was when she fake cries to get the sheriff out of the house.
That was a very good one.
Because that not only showed that she, for the time being, was going to be supportive of her husband, but it was also her showing her husband, look, I can fake this as much as you can. Mm-hmm. And I liked, again, it made her a much stronger character.
Yeah. Yeah, though I will say, go back to that, one of the things that made me upset the most is after Jack shoots Fogarty, I got so upset that Tom does not hug him. Your son just killed somebody for you that's about to kill you, and he does what? Takes the shotgun from him, and I felt like he almost belittled him. He just didn't really do anything. He didn't comfort his son or anything. So.
Well, and I think that plays into what Brittany was mentioning earlier about, he doesn't want he doesn't want that for his son. He doesn't want his son to go down this violent path. You know, which is the same reason why he is so upset when Jack gets into that fight at school.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my decision, I walked a thin line between Baggett and Stackett. And I decided, even though it was just by a little bit, I decided to go with Baggett, but that's mainly because I'm comparing it with the comic. Here's the thing. The comic and the movie are completely different. And so they can be considered two completely different works. You can look at the comic as one thing, and you can look at the movie as a completely different thing. But as I've said throughout this episode, the movie takes the idea of the comic and to me gives it more depth. I do agree with you, though, which is where I, teeter-totter on that line. I do think that the movie needed more time to develop that story, but I think the movie was just way more interesting in telling the story of a man having to deal with his past, quote-unquote, history of violence. I like that it took the violent tendencies, it showed how it affected people in several different ways. I mean, we even get glimpses of it's because of what Tom Joey did to Fogarty that makes Fogarty the way he is. And we get a little bit of Richie, like why he's having to do what he's having to do is because of the way he's being treated by, I think he says, the Boston Mafia. And so I like that every character, and I even think with the daughter, I forgot her name in the movie, it's Ellie in the comic, but I think even with the daughter and shielding her from all of it is just another aspect. I think every character, it's a different aspect of how they are dealing with violence in their life. As I also said, the comic book, you could really just read chapter 1 that ends with the front yard face-off, and you could be happy because the comic loses steam after that. I was not as interested in the backstory of Richie and Joey. I was not as interested in when he goes back for his revenge. Whereas those last 30 minutes of the movie, even though there's not a lot to it, I liked it a lot better.
I think the action at the end definitely saves it. It definitely changed pace. Going from very slow, methodical, is he or is he not Joey? What's going to happen with Fogarty? And then all of a sudden, boom, in 5 minutes, he's driven 15 hours to Philadelphia to go confront his brother.
Was that a surprise to you to find out that that was his brother?
Yes.
A little bit.
Again, like I said, I don't know if it's because I knew more about it, and so I wasn't going in with those fresh eyes like Brittany was, but I was just like, okay, yeah, they're brothers, great.
I'd forgotten how quickly he wants to kill him.
Oh yeah,
they talk for 2 minutes, and he basically says, "Well, the only way I can solve this is by killing you. You've cost me everything."
But now, did you get the impression that maybe he didn't want to go through with it because he does turn his chair around?
A little bit, yeah. He can't watch it, and so because he basically tells him, "I'm gonna kill you," and he kind of turns around as the henchman comes to strangle him. And I will say it was pretty funny after the failed assassination attempt. He goes to the guy who, Joey/Tom has killed, and he's like, "Really? Like, you messed that up?"
And then shoots him.
Yeah.
I did. It was kind of funny, a little bit of the humor that was in there, because even when he locks him out of the house, and he turns around, he's like, "Okay, what do I do now?" And then he just pulls his house keys out of his pocket. But then you go back to Tom, Joey, whoever you want to say, opening up the door, pointing the gun, and just shooting him. Like there's no more words, no anything, just shoots him. I don't know. It was an interesting story, and maybe if we were more of like psychology teachers or whatnot, we could probably delve into this a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think it's one of those that if you watch it, 5 times, every single time you watch it, you're going to see something different, which is always a cool way. I mean, it's definitely a movie you can't be walking in and out of. You can't be on your phone. You can't be doing anything else. You have to be watching the movie or you're going to miss something if you're not paying attention.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you both for joining me on that. I enjoyed the conversation, and I enjoy the fact that we had Brittany there who had never seen this or heard about it or anything. That's always fun too to get a fresh perspective on it.
Yeah, it was very exciting to be a part of this, but then also to do something that, like you had said, that's something brand new. So I had no perspective. It wasn't a movie or a comic that I had ever read or watched before, and so it was just my true first watch impressions.
And who knows, maybe she'll start listening to the podcast now.
Hey, let's hope so. And let's hope we can get some more listeners out there too. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts so that people like Brittany can be aware of the show and can give it a listen. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Moving Panels. And we'll be here, as always, bringing you our nerdy little conversations about TVs and movies and their comic book connections. But one more time, I want to thank Justin and Brittany for joining me. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
All right, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.